When you play the Game of Thrones, you
subscribe and like,
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Comms YouTube channel. In today's video, we are going to be getting back to our rewrite of the main series of Game of Thrones. In last episode, we did Season 5. Now, it's actually been quite a while in between these. I had an entire Christmas event, so I wasn't able to get to it then, and then I also had some stuff. And this is a video that took a little bit of time to just write out what I wanted to do and how I wanted to go forward with certain plot lines, because again, it is kind of hard to adapt Feast for Crows and Dance because of how they're separated in the books. You have to, like, more or less, I think the books need 2 seasons, right? Kind of what they did with season 3 and 4 for Storm of Swords. And it's tough to pinpoint the halfway point of all of their stories and make it make sense for a show, right? Because if you want a show, you want it to be kind of the middle climax of each story. So, for instance, a Storm of Swords, like the middle climax of a Storm of Swords is the Red Wedding, more or less. It kind of happens in the front half, and you can stretch that into being like your climax of season 3, and then you can do the back half for season 4. Also, Hair's a Mess. We're recording at midnight. What else have you come to expect from the Grease Goblins channel? It's what we do here, all right? But yeah, so this will be my Season 6 rewrite. If you haven't seen my Season 5 one, I would highly recommend that you do, just based upon that's going to be the whole precursor to this video. If you don't want to watch that video, more or less, I split the plots probably about midway through. This one will be covering kind of the back half of Feast and also Dance with Dragons. And yeah, so we'll go through each individual character or main story plot, and we'll go from there. But before we get into the video, if you guys like to subscribe, like, and comment, please do. It helps the channel grow, which feel that might like this content as well. And let's get into it. So the opening scene of Season 6 is going to be following Meereen Parade. Now, this, you guys might be thinking, okay, this is a little out of order. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. But what I think we need to do is, because in last season, I kind of retconned the whole idea that Lady Stoneheart didn't happen, right? I went back and I said, screw D&D, we're putting it in there, right? So I put its way in there and I introduced it. Now, we didn't really see a whole lot of that plot in the actual season. So what I want to do to start out this opening season, because we're going to fit again the trend of the kind of dark openings, the cold opens, and we're going to see basically the Meereen Frey POV kind of play out the way it does in the epilogue of Storm of Swords, because one, that establishes the growing threat of Lady Stoneheart and the idea that the Freys are kind of being hunted. It kind of sets up that whole idea and will tie nicely into Brienne's kind of conclusion of her arc later on in this season. And I really like starting it with this because we needed a scene, for one, to establish kind of the tone of the season, where there's a lot of things that happen in the season that aren't great for our characters, right? A lot of our characters find themselves in really weird situations or kind of at like that crossroads. So if we look at a lot of characters and where they're going to end up in the season, Dany is basically going to be lost in the Dothraki Sea, getting captured by the Dothraki. Jon's going to die. Tyrion's going to be in an interesting spot where he's been enslaved, and now he's with the Second Sons, trying to get them to flip to Dany's side. Weird thing going on there. We see Cersei basically been stripped of all of her power at this point. Jaime in a weird kind of position where Cersei wants him to come back to King's Landing, but he really has kind of abandoned that life now, and he's doing his own thing as the commander. And also the idea of, does he take up arms against the Tullys? Will he have to, rush a river run to take it from the Blackfish? So a lot of things going on here that are interesting, and it's kind of going to set the tone for the actual season. So as we kind of go through these, kind of keep that in the back of your mind. That's kind of what the whole point is of this season, and to pay off a lot of things that were set up in the prior season. Now, we'll start with Tyrion's plotline. So Tyrion's plotline will pick up with his capture by Jorah. So we kind of ended that with the last part of Season 5, where he gets captured by Jorah. And in Season 6, we're going to explore kind of their journey, them being enslaved, meeting Penny, pretty much following the books, more or less. Now, I will say, I do think we could cut out some things from Tyrion's story arc to give to other characters, because I don't think Tyrion's character arc is necessarily as important as other plot lines going on at this time. Things like when they're enslaved, we can just cut out certain scenes that just don't matter as much as like Jon's stuff, or even, some Dany stuff, or stuff in King's Landing with Kevin Lannister that I want to give a lot of attention to. So I probably would suggest that Tyrion is going to be more of a minor character in this season. Last season, he still kind of was a major character, and I really liked playing on the idea of him and young Griff and introducing that, because young Griff will be a very pivotal character going forward. But in this season, he doesn't really have a lot to do. It's really showing the cruelty of slavery and how that system is working. And he's really going to be a character that helps build Dany's arc when we're getting it from Tyrion's point of view, and being enslaved and some of these cruelties that Dany's trying to solve. So that's what a lot of his character is going to be about, as well as just his own growth and him trying to work through his own demons and becoming a better person. And that's what Penny is kind of there for. So Dany's plot, that'll kind of lead us into that pretty nicely. So hers is going to be, she accepts Hizdar's offer. So we had this idea that Dany gives this proposition at the end of season 5 to Hizdar that if he can keep the peace, she will marry him. And we're going to pick up in this first episode of season 6 by kind of showing the differences between the end of season 5 and the start of season 6, where the city, or Meereen, is very much kind of in peace. There hasn't been a lot of killings, or there hasn't been any killings, actually. And what we see here is that maybe in episode 2, I think that's probably a good place here to space it out. We show kind of episode 1, how Dany is maybe talking to Barristan, saying, well, he's kept up his side of the bargain, and showing the peace that, and how Meereen is maybe thriving during this period. Now, episode 2 is going to be where Dany is like, okay, Hizdar, we can marry, kind of, setting up the marriage and going into that idea. And then episode 3 can kind of be our marriage. It can be our marriage. So Hizdar and Dany, they get married, and we see that, and we see all that happen. And so the rest of this season, right, is going to be focusing on what this marriage does for characters like Barristan, Quentyn, Daario, how it affects Dany's power. Because something in the books that's very interesting is that when Dany leaves, Hizdar starts gaining a lot of power, putting his people in charge. I want to show in this season how Hizdar tries to do those things before Dany even leaves, and how Barristan and maybe even Daario can maybe note those things and even try to tell Dany of that. And so when it comes to later on in the season, we actually have a much more built-up conflict to where will Barristan basically overthrow Hizdar. So that, I think that's a really good idea, and where that's going to go. Now, Quentyn's another interesting character. So Quentyn, I decided to kind of cut a lot of his story, because the whole idea here is that Quentyn goes through this whole little trip where he's trying to get to Dany. And what works in the book, right, is that in the book, it's really building up who Quentyn is as a person. It's getting us kind of attached to Quentyn as a character for kind of his big death at the end. I know people don't think he's dead, but I personally think he's dead. So kind of his death, making it a little bit more emotional and impactful, and understanding his motives why he does that. In my story, I don't think it's necessary. I think it's quite okay to just have it where maybe episode 1, Daario is sent out to do, his scouting like normal in the book. He comes back with Quentyn, and we have this big reveal. Now, I will say, before we even get to the Quentyn, it's not going to be something out of left field, right? So we're going to see that in the episode prior to Quentyn showing up, or maybe during the episode that Quentyn shows up. It's probably going to be about an episode prior, because I want to have probably Quentyn show up in episode 4 right after the wedding. So I think for me personally, I think we can just introduce Quentyn as he's being introduced to Dany. So the audience is kind of in Dany's point of view here, where we as an audience don't know much about Quentyn. We're kind of on the fence about Quentyn, just like how Dany is. And also we see how this kind of creates an issue, because Dany is already married to Quentyn, or not to Quentyn, to Hizdar. So I think we could play that out. We could introduce Quentyn and still have him be part of the story, but we take out some of his things because screen time can be devoted to other places that are more impactful. Now, other things I want to really hone in on in this season with Dany's camp. See, last season, I didn't have a major focus on Dany. I didn't think she had a lot really going on, because, again, it's kind of the first half of Dany's story, and there's not a ton there to work towards outside of just showing how Meereen is going to be corrupt, how Meereen is kind of eating itself alive, how Dany is struggling to rule. This season, we can also focus on other things that are going to pay off later on in season 6. We can have Dany kind of trying to learn to control her dragons, trying to understand them, and having more dreams of Drogon, or dragon dreams as a whole, having her really focusing on that part of herself as a Targaryen, something that I feel like the show did not do a great job of. Just in the show where Drogon shows up, and there didn't really feel like it made any sense, in my opinion. Like, it's a really great scene, don't get me wrong, where Dany first rides Drogon, but it felt like it was unearned, whereas the book felt earned. It felt like there was kind of that idea, and Dany herself thinks she's going to die. She's kind of whipping Drogon and all these things to try and get him, showing fearlessness and courage that helps tame Drogon. I really want to explore that and show that dynamic and have it be paid off really well with her dynamic with Drogon and her dragons. So I want to again have the whole Drogon showing up idea in episode 8. So in season 5 in the show, they did it a bit differently. In my version, I want to have it in episode 8, because here's the whole idea here. So we have a lot of things that happen in Meereen after Dany leaves. So I think it's very important that we leave a little bit of room here, right? So episode 9, I kind of want to be, for Dany's like plot, to be kind of a plotting episode. So we've had kind of this build up to this moment. Dany's left, right? And I want to show a lot of things here with this part of the story, showing how the common people don't know what to think here. Is Dany dead? Has she abandoned them? What happened there? I really want to play on that aspect and that uncertainty in a lot of our characters, whereas the show really didn't do that much. It really didn't feel like there was this big whole idea that, oh, Dany might not come back for the average person, right? And another thing I want to show here is continuing, again, for Barristan's point of view in this, how Hizdahr is replacing Dany's power, how he is kind of putting his own people in here, and Barristan himself is losing power. And I also want to show the idea of Quentyn, how Quentyn's going to have been pushed out of this, and he feels like he's a failure. He can't go home with nothing, and why a lot of these issues and how his naivety and his youth leads him to try and steal a dragon. And I want to play on that whole idea. So, again, I also want to mirror something that I think is very important. Ned to Barristan. So Ned in season 1, there's this idea of, should he just take all of Cersei's children in the night, arrest her, take over power during the night with Renly? And I want to parallel that to Barristan, where Ned chooses not to do that, where Barristan thinks maybe he shouldn't be doing that, but ends up going that route and seizing power. So I want to see play on that kind of dynamic, and the Quentyn storyline will pretty much go the same. They try to bust out a dragon, tame a dragon, and he ends up dying. And we can even play on the idea that maybe Quentyn isn't even dead. We can have it where Quentyn, the fire like comes over Quentyn, but we don't know if he's dead. It could be just a thing we keep loose, just like the book. I'm fine with that as well. So that's pretty much Dany's plotline. We also see at the very end in season 10, pretty much the same idea, is that Dany's wandering around. She gets picked up by the Dothraki, and that's that. And that will lead us to our next one. I wanted to kind of get the main 3 out of the way kind of quicker, but we're going to get to Jon's plotline. So Jon's plotline basically ends in season 5 with Stannis leaving the Wall, and Jon now is able to command the Wall himself. He really doesn't have that pressure of Stannis on his back anymore. He can pretty much do what he needs to do. And this season is going to be about integrating the wildlings into the Wall. And this is something that I think the show really didn't do well. And I actually think in season 5, Jon's plotline was done pretty well. It's just there's this one aspect that really wasn't there. Whereas in the books, we see really how desperate the Wall is at this point. Jon is basically saying, we need wildlings to man the Wall. Like, he's actively getting them involved to do those things, integrating these two societies that hate each other into one, and how their food is running low. They're not going to be able to survive without getting a loan from the Iron Bank. I want to show why there's so many issues and why Jon is needing the wildlings to come into the watch. And I also want to do something else that I think George does a really great job of showing pushback, showing the other people's perspective other than Jon's. Because in the show, we really only saw that through Alistair Thorne, and it was like, Alistair Thorne already hated Jon. So in the show, it was very much like, okay, Alistair Thorne's the bad guy, Jon's the good guy. Which one are you going to pick? In the books, it's actually done much differently. In the books, we have characters that are not inherently bad. They're not villains. They're not characters we hate. Bowen Marsh is a character that I've talked about in the past who has compelling arguments. If we take on all these wildlings, how are we going to feed them? If we're taking on a loan from the Iron Bank, how are we ever going to pay that back? That's going to put us in a really bad situation. And talking about all of these ideas that are very interesting. They're very good counter arguments, but from Jon's point of view, we see the opposite side of that, where if we let the wildlings die, they're going to become just in the army of the dead. We're going to see that these wildlings could be used to help fight the others, to help man the castle, get more vision of what's going on north of the wall. These wildlings know the north better than the Watch does. So again, we have this idea of two very compelling arguments, and we've seen generations and generations of the Night's Watch not befriending the wildlings. So we understand by the end of this season why the Night's Watchmen kind of flip on Jon. And I really want to show that, because the show, it did a decent job of showing Jon's struggles with ruling the Night's Watch. It doesn't go the whole route there. And I want to really put that in there. And Jon, to me, needs to be a focal point of this season. Last season, I think he was, just one of the normal, point of views, just not like a mass amount of time was given to Jon. But in this season, I really want to focus in on Jon. And there's other things that the show didn't do that also need to be included. Because the pink letter, they had to basically completely change the pink letter in the show versus how the books do it. So one thing that I want to note here is I want to also show Mel. I want Mel to really, because again, here's the other issue. In the show, they decide when Stannis leaves that Mel also goes. So Mel is not there in the show to warn Jon and give him, advice on what her visions are showing her. And that kind of is a little bit detrimental as well to the storyline. So what we're going to do here is we're going to keep Mel at the wall. And it makes more sense for her to be there. And all of these visions that we're getting, right? That, she's seeing these daggers in the dark coming for Jon and constantly telling Jon, and Jon's just not listening. He's not paying attention, so that when we get to the end of the season, it's been foreshadowed. It's something that's not like, it's kind of out of the blue, where in the show, it didn't feel out of the blue. It did feel earned in the show, but I felt like they could have done more to make that moment even more heartbreaking, because Jon would have been giving information from Mel that this was going to happen, and he just didn't listen to it. And also, I want to also put in the idea that Mel, again, does the whole Arya's in the snow plot with the horse, which we know is not Arya. It's Alice Karstark. Play into that idea as well, right? In the show, they did a lot of things that took the magical or kind of the fantasy element out of the show, and that really needs to be there for Jon. And also having Mel here allows us to, again, have Jon being resurrected in season 7, just like I think he's going to be in Winds of Winter. But yeah, I don't know. So as we continue on this plot, right, we have the idea here that unlike how the show does it, we get this pink letter, and it's very mysterious. It says that Stannis has been defeated, and all of these other ideas. Now again, the pink letter is here, and it's going to be placed at a very interesting moment, because when we get to the Stannis plot, the last part we're going to see of Stannis is that he hears that the Manderleys and the Freys are coming to their camp to kill them. So we're going to get this pink letter, and Jon's whole thing will be the end of the season, or the end of the last episodes of the end of the season, exactly how they did it in season 5 on the show. So it's going to be interesting to see that, okay, in this letter Stannis is dead, and all of these other things are going on. And that is a much more important catalyst to why the Night's Watchman would kill them, or why they would kill him, instead of what ends up playing out on the show. Where on the show, in the books, it's this whole idea that Jon's going to try and go south with the wildlings or whoever else will come with him. And that's breaking his vows. That's actively breaking his vows alongside of, getting buddy-buddy with the wildlings and all that, and this leads us to Jon's death. And this is something they whiffed on in the show, where in the show is this whole thing that was like, oh yeah, these people actively didn't like Jon, wanted to kill him. And it was, it still was an emotional gut punch when Jon dies in the show. But in the books, it's much more heartbreaking. There's people crying as they're killing Jon. This comes off way more as a difficult decision, something that genuinely was a tough decision. These people had come to either respect Jon or maybe even like Jon, but they thought that Jon was going to get them killed and was doing a bad job ruling and had broken his vows. And that's a much more compelling arc for Jon's storyline and how we see him end. It could be one of the most traumatic, emotional scenes since the Red Wedding. And that's why I always say season 5 of Game of Thrones, the show, could have been one of the best if they had simply done plotlines correctly. And personally, again, I don't think you can put both books into one season. But this is a moment that should have been one of the greatest, not greatest because it's not a happy moment, but one of the best and well done parts of the show. And I think the way we see this ending is Jon saying ghost, not Ollie, ghost, because it sets up the idea that Jon wargs into ghost to set up how he comes back in the next season. But Jon lying there dead, and it fades to black, ending the season. And that's how Jon's storyline goes. Jon, to me, will have one of the stronger character arcs and the one with the most plot. And King's Landing. So King's Landing is going to be a tale of two POVs. In the first half of this season, we're going to focus a lot on Cersei. So Cersei has been imprisoned. That's kind of the cliffhanger we left off on in the last season. And I want to show her struggles, similar to how they did it in season 5, where she starts off being very aggressive, where she's very much Cersei Lannister. She's lashing out to the Septas. And what I want to show by the end of the opening episode is the breaking down of Cersei and how she becomes more of the tamed lion. How she is someone that realizes all of this is not going to help her. Lashing out's not going to be the way. And she's going to have to submit, where she's being woken up every hour. She might as well just submit to them. And we see that in episode 2 and 3, it's going to be more of her trying to figure out how to get out of the situation. How she's in hell. She's trying to just figure out what she can do. And at the end of episode 3, we're going to see Qyburn visit her and kind of telling her how hopeless the situation is, how there's nothing really that he can do. And Cersei's going to have this last plea that send a brother to Jaime to tell him to come back and that she loves him. And this will be kind of our resolution, more or less, to their kind of conflict in season 5. And we'll see how that results with Jaime's plot later on. But that's going to be the first part of it. Now, during this time, I also want to show Kevin Lannister's arrival back into the plot. Because Kevin Lannister is going to be another very important character to the show. And I want Kevin Lannister to be in this role that he is the one fixing the situation. He's helping build up relations with the Tyrells again. He's doing all of this work behind the scenes. And I want to show that, right? So I kind of want to have a little couple scenes with Kevin Lannister in the early 3 episodes, right? Or 3 or 4 episodes of just him, being introduced, named as, the Hand of the King, Lord Protector for now, and ruling. Building up the relations, putting the Tyrells back in places of power that Cersei just frankly wasn't and was insulting them. And I want Kevin Lannister to be kind of resembling Tyrion from book 2 or season 2, where he's in this place of power and he goes about trying to set things right. And yeah, so episode 4, we're going to have a break from Cersei, Kevin, and the King's Landing plot. And then in episode 5, we finally understand what Cersei is going to have to do to get back to Tommen. And it's really her having a conversation with the High Sparrow, confessing, and kind of figuring out in the next episode what she's going to have to do. In episode 6, we're going to get her walk. And that will be kind of the big part for Cersei. And after that point, Cersei's going to kind of fade out of the plot, really. She's not going to be a major character for the rest of this season. She's going to be kind of a reactionary character. As Kevin Lannister kind of tells her, your whole reputation's broken. You have disgraced the Lannisters, more or less. You're going to be sent back to Casterly Rock. Cersei has no power at this point. She can't do anything. She's been completely stripped of her dignity, power, reputation, everything. She's at her lowest point now. And Kevin Lannister, has been doing everything he possibly can. We actually see some stability that King's Landing has not really seen since kind of around that season 3, early season 4 before Joffrey's death. And that's kind of what we're going to get a resemblance of. And that will all be paid off at the end of the season when Varys kills Kevin and also kills Pycelle, giving Cersei her window back into power. And we'll pick up on that in season 7 if I end up doing one, if you guys like this video enough. So, Bran's plotline. Now, Bran was a character that in season 5, I didn't know what to do with him. Because not a lot really happens that you can make 2 seasons of. It's hard to split his arc. So I decided in season 5, we pretty much just have the splitting of his arc being they arrive at the cave and they kind of are introduced maybe into Bloodraven at the end. So what this season is going to be about that I'm actually pretty excited to do, and I think Bran could be actually very interesting, is something that they did in season 6 of the television show. In season 6, Bran was a character that kind of had a lot of flashbacks, whether that was showing Lyanna, Ned, Benjen as a kid, or showing the Tower of Joy stuff. In this season, what I want to do with Bran is basically show him, or show us, the audience, and Bran, a little bit of the Targaryen history, as well as some of the important events that will impact the story later on. So, for one, I do want to show the Tower of Joy, but not its entirety. Because I don't think this is the season to show everything off. I want to show the fight of the Tower of Joy later on in this season, but I don't want to go any further. I want to leave that kind of as a cliffhanger, right? Where we see that Ned wins, Howland Reed, yeah, we see all that happens, whatever. And then there is that kind of scream, and then we get cut off. Kind of how they did it in the show as well, but we just don't see the next part of that until in the next season. Now, I also want to show things that building up to that moment, right? Because I want to show really a little bit of the story of Robert's Rebellion before we even get to that point. I want to show the Knight of the Laughing Tree at Harrenhal. I don't want to show who is the Knight of the Laughing Tree, but just introducing that plot. We see a quick little thing here of the Knight of the Laughing Tree and showing Aerys telling Rhaegar to go find the Knight of the Laughing Tree and all that idea. I want to introduce that. I want to show Robert killing Rhaegar on the Trident. What a fantastic scene that could be. And again, not showing like the entire episode or anything, but showing that individual scene, again, shows a lot of what happened there and would build us perfectly into the Tower of Joy. And I also want to do one other thing here that would be important for Dany's character. I don't know where I'm going to go with Dany's character if I continue this rewrite, but I want to keep the door open. So I want to show a young Rhaenyra. You guys know I'm a Rhaenyra fanboy. I love my Rhaenyra. She's my favorite Targaryen. And I want to show scenes mirroring how Dany will face an issue of ruling as a woman. I want to show maybe the scene where in House of the Dragon, right, where people are pledging to Rhaenyra. I'd love to show that, and then skip to a part where Rhaenyra is struggling, whether that's her at Dragonstone and the war's about to happen at the Black Council, or showing how the end of the war, where Rhaenyra started out as this young girl, but now she's in King's Landing and she's struggling to rule, how it's gone to her head, how she's kind of losing it. She's kind of turned into like a Cersei Lannister type person. I want to show that, and I think it's very intriguing because it parallels a lot of characters in the story. It parallels Cersei's issues right now. It parallels Dany's issues right now. It can even parallel other characters within the story, like an Asha trying to find her way up north. We'll talk about her a little bit later on. Arianne, Marjorie. It's a great little part that I'd love to show. And the last little thing that I want to foreshadow and to show would be the killing of Meleys the Monstrous. So one, we could play on the idea that A, it is presumed the last Blackfire is dead. But two, it also introduced that idea that is young Griff a Blackfire? It could put that question in the audience where, why are we being shown this, right? And we could question young Griff's parentage. And then in episode 10, we see him, or Bran, drink the paste. And I also want to show here kind of the discontent of a lot of our characters, where Meera, Jojen, they don't really like being here. Where Jojen kind of feels weird. He kind of knows that he's going to be eaten and made into a paste for Bran. We're not actually going to tell that. Like, Jojen's not going to say that or anything, but he's going to be acting really weird. Meera's going to be pretty discontent with being here. So, kind of what we actually did see in the show. And I also want to show that Bran is a little confused. Like, he thought he would be able to get his legs back or run or do something. And that's not really the case. And I want to show how Bloodraven's kind of a little bit mysterious. He led Bran here and didn't really do what Bran wanted. So I want to show how that Bloodraven's kind of been misleading Bran and how we shouldn't really trust Bloodraven, but he's kind of the character that Bran just has to trust in this moment. I also want to note, I think another cool flashback that we could see with Bran's plotline would be maybe getting something of Bloodraven himself, whether that's him taking down the first Blackfire rebellion, could be pretty cool. Any of those things would be really cool, but I don't know. That is kind of Bran's plotline for me in season 6. Don't have much else there. Moving on to the Greyjoy plot. So the Greyjoy plot was a major pivotal part of season 5. Season 6, we're going to kind of bring it back a little bit. Because again, there's not a ton that actually happens after the King's Moot when you really think about it with the Greyjoy plot. So really what we're going to see is we're going to see two different Greyjoy plots. One is going to be Asha goes up to Deepwood Mont. It's going to be her kind of considering her options at Deepwood, trying to figure out what she's going to do. And then we're also going to see in episode 1, Victarion and Euron taking the shields, mainly through Victarion and his battle there. Episode 2 is going to cover Asha's capture at Deepwood Mont by Stannis, and Victarion and Euron's meeting at the end of episode 2, explaining that Victarion will go to Meereen, trying to get Dany for Euron and all that stuff. And for the most part here, Victarion's plot is going to stay the same. He's kind of going to take a back seat. We're going to check on him, like, every so often, but really just follow the book. He, taking some ships, his fleet gets split up. He meets Maquaro. He gets this really cool arm. Going to pretty much follow that pretty much directly. I don't really see a point of straying too far from that. Don't think we have to actually really cut much from Victarion's plot either. But I think it's fine to just have Victarion end up where he's sailing to Meereen by the end of the season, where all these characters are going to culminate when Dany gets back and all that stuff. Another thing I want to do, actually, before I move on to Asha's plot, is I want to show how long it actually takes to kind of sail around the world, really. It's something that I think the show did a very poor job of doing, but I don't want Victarion to just show up in Meereen in, like, one episode. That's the way the show would have done it. I want it to be like, when we check in on Victarion, he's going from place to place to place to place, and show that this journey is taking a while, and that's something that I want to do there. Now moving on to Asha. So Asha is going to be like basically our Stannis POV, kind of how she is in the books. She's just going to be this character that's captured by Stannis. We just see an insight as to the status of Stannis's campaign. I want to do one specific thing that in past seasons, we kind of knew what Stannis was planning because we had Davos in the inner circle and we would get scenes between Mel and Stannis. I want to keep it to where we don't see Stannis almost at all, where we're learning what Stannis is going to do through Asha. There's no scenes of Stannis and maybe his generals or whatever. We're learning on the fly, and I want to keep that very mysterious. I think that builds a lot of intrigue to Stannis and his plot as a whole. And like I said, we're going to see Stannis pretty much, they're going to be marching through the snow. They're getting bogged down by the winter, more or less. And it's going to play out pretty much the same. We're going to see at the end of the season that, again, like I talked about earlier, that the Freys and the Mayonnaise are on their way to attack Stannis. Also, Jane and Theon will be captured as they jumped off the wall. and they'll at the beginning of episode 10, and we'll see kind of how that plays out as well. So that is my Greyjoy plot as well. So continuing on, that will leave us to Davos's plot. So Davos's plot, where we left him in the last season, was Davos. He's imprisoned, and we don't really see him ever again in that season. It's kind of a cliffhanger. We get a little bit of an idea that at Cersei's like small council meeting that Davos has been killed. Manderly has put his head and his like fingers or whatever on his gates. And that's all. We don't see Davos again in season 5. So it's left very open-ended. Now, Davos's plot will pretty much follow the books pretty similarly, where we have this idea that Davos is kind of writing a letter to his wife, and he's kind of recounting his life. He's sitting in prison. I want that to kind of be a focus for like episode 1. And it's very similar to maybe where when Tyrion was in prison. I kind of want that to kind of parallel a little bit. And that'll probably take up episode 1. We probably won't see him in episode 2. And then in episode 3, we'll get the North Remembers. I kind of want that to actually be the title of the episode. And we'll get the big reveal that Wyman Manderly is not what we originally thought he was. And we get the whole idea that the North remembers, that Rickon's still alive, blah, 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 blah. All right, we'll get that whole idea. One of the best scenes, and it'll be early on in the season, so it'll be a nice little touch there. But Davos will then go to Skagos. And this plot is kind of tricky to do from here because, as we know, that's kind of the last we get of Davos. There's not really any more there. So I kind of have to just make it up as I go for this point because this is the last we get. So what I do here is I would then show him probably in episode 5 getting a small boat and setting sail. Because remember, he has to do this very low-key, right? Wyman can maybe give him gold, this or that, but he can't really publicly support him. And also Wyman has his own shit. He's got to go to Winterfell. So we're going to get kind of that idea in episode 5 just to kind of show what he's up to. And then I think the future episodes, right, we're going to only see a little bit of him to kind of discussing the dangers of Skagos, building up what Skagos is as a place as a whole. And I would have episode 10 having him actually land in Skagos. That would kind of be our end point, and we could pick up in that in the next season. Now, the Dorne plot, again, was a major pivotal role of last season that I think is actually going to be minimized in this season, just because the Dorne plot, in my opinion, kind of has to wait for the young Griff plotline to actually advance. So in my opinion, Dorne actually has a very limited role here. And we'd pick up, I think, with Arya being locked in a room. And this would probably take up maybe an episode. And then episode 2, we would have her getting her good old scene with her dad, kind of figuring out what's going on, why, is he not doing anything, it appears, and what his whole plan is. So we'll get that in episode 2, that, she was supposed to marry Viserys. She was supposed to be queen. And it's a great scene, in my opinion, to get the season rolling. And that, to me, is going to be a pivotal role. And we're going to leave this plot for quite a bit, right? Like, we're going to just kind of just abandon it, right? That's a good point to end. The last thing I want to hear out of Duran is going to be, or the last part of the Dorne plot that we're going to see for a while, right, is going to be, yes, you're doing this, and you're going to hopefully explore this young Griff guy, right? And so more or less, what we're going to finish with the Dorne plot here in episode 2 is basically going to lead into Quentyn. So when we say, oh, okay, Duran, sent Quentyn on a mission to marry Dany and bring her into the fold. That is going to be a good kind of segue, right? Because we're going to get the Dany wedding, and then episode 4 will be into Quentyn. Maybe in episode 3 we can add like some introductory Quentyn episodes before that moment when he's introduced to Dany. But I think for me, that's fine. And then I think later on in the season, we'll get maybe 1 or 2 scenes getting Duran and Arya reacting to what's happening with young Griff, and eventually setting up that plot that Arya goes to figure out who young Griff is. Now, the Theon plot. I don't actually have a lot to say here about Theon's plot. Basically, follow the books to a T is how I would do Theon's plot. And we're going to be following the back half, right? Because the last thing we saw in season 5 was the wedding between Jane Poole and Ramsay. So So more or less what we're going to see in this season is going to be the back half of that plot of Dance. And I want to follow it to a T. I think Theon's plot in Dance is one of the best ones, and I would just try my best to closely follow it. Really showing in this season Theon's arc of becoming Theon once again and growing as a person to where he's willing to help Jane escape, and then they jump off the wall. That is more or less what Theon's plot's going to be about. It's going to be about how there's infighting going on, people are dying in Winterfell, and why Roose decides to let the Manderleys and Freys go and try to fight Stannis. That's what more or less his plot's going to be about, and it's going to be one of the better ones of the season, in my opinion. Just follow the books pretty much the same. Now, Brienne's plot, again, follow the books pretty closely. I think we can cut some things out here and there, but more or less, we're going to have her wandering the Riverlands again, trying to find Arya and Sansa, and her journey is going to take her to the Quiet Isle. Now, the issue here that arises is because the way Season 4 did the Hound fighting Brienne, you can't have this whole idea that Brienne is going down hunting down the Hound, because Brienne pretty much knows that the Hound is dead, more or less, quote unquote. So I think what we would have here is that when she gets to the Quiet Isle, her questions would be different. Her questions would be, who is trying to take the place of the Hound, right? Because I know he's dead and all these things. And we would have this whole idea where we would still get the idea of the Gravediggers idea, where Brienne looks over and sees this kind of person that could be the Hound. We can get all of that still. And this will kind of take up really the first half of the season, kind of this whole idea and playing on, is the Hound still alive and all of that. And I want to lead up to around episode 7 is when they get to the inn and they are attacked by Roge, I don't know how to say his name, and Biter. And Brienne, it's a brutal scene, very similar to the way the Hound scene was. It's kind of where that fight was inspired by. And have it where Brienne loses and she passes out. And then in episode 8, we can pick up, I think episode 8, a really strong opening scene, could be Brienne being dragged. So she's like, her eyes are kind of going open, shut, kind of what they do in a lot of movies when characters are like knocked out or they get captured. I like that idea. We have Brienne kind of like seeing where she's kind of going, but not really. She's very confused what's going on. And we see that she's informed about what's going on by Thoros and the state of the Brotherhood without banners and this whole idea. We'll then leave this episode or this plot for an episode. So episode 9, they won't be included. And then episode 10, we will see that she is brought before Stoneheart. And that all plays out. Brienne is more or less hanged until she says that she'll go find Jaime. And that's how the season ends for Brienne. Arya was another kind of minor character in the season 5. But we're going to pick up with Arya being blind. Because again, she didn't do what she was supposed to do. She killed someone that she wasn't supposed to. So I want to show Arya struggling with her blindness at first. And taking this idea of how in episode 1, she struggles a lot. But in episode 3, we come back to her where she's coping much better with this. Yes, she's not perfect. But she's understanding how to live like this. And I want to show here how because her sight is gone, her other senses are being heightened. She's training her hearing, her smell, her touch. These things are being heightened senses that will be very useful to her very much later on. And also I want to show how Arya is learning how to detect lies better. These are all very important things for Arya's growth and development as a character. If we're going to have her be this badass assassin character later, it's very important that we get these things going on here now, where these are more of build-up scenes for our characters like Arya, like Sansa. I also want to show Arya having her dreams in Nymeria, where she's seeing the wolf pack and she's seeing what's going on here in the Riverlands. I want to show that as well, showing how that part of Arya still lingers on as well. And around episode 5, we'll have the whole idea where Arya is able to identify Jaqen and be given her sight back. And this kind of completes the first half for Arya. It kind of completes the building of that part of her character. And it's something that the show missed on, where the show had her doing a bunch of stuff that didn't build her up as this assassin character, didn't teach her really anything. This is something that we can look back on and say, like, a season later where she has to I don't know, do something in the dark, or she's trying to detect if someone's lying to her, or this or that, we can look back on a moment like this where this was properly set up. But yeah, so the back half of this arc will be Arya kind of preparing for her mission to assassinate the old man, selling kind of like the ship insurance, more or less, or the boat insurance. And that's going to be kind of the back half of her plot. And what we're going to kind of see is how, after that moment, Arya kind of questions if she still wants to be in this organization. I think that's something we also want to play on in the back half of this, is this worth it? Does she want to go home? And it's something that we'll build into in the next season, because it's going to be kind of a major plot point. So I also want to sprinkle that in as well when we get our Arya scenes as well. Sam, I didn't really have much to say here with Sam. And at the end of season 5, I had Sam, I believe, where he gets to Bravos and they're leaving Bravos. That's kind of the end part of the journey. So this season we'll pick up with him, reaching Old Town, starting his, journey, and all of his stuff with Marwyn. I think that's a good spot for Sam. Sam, we can just have him researching, learning more about kind of the others, and learning about some other things while he's there. But there's not really a lot for me, in my opinion, to add to Sam's plotline. I think we can more or less just sprinkle him in when needed. Now, again, the Sansa, is another rough plot to do, because it's kind of hard to do her plot. Sansa is a very minor character in Feast, and she doesn't really have much to do outside of just kind of manipulating characters, like Robert Arryn. So what we're going to see here is that we pick up with them leaving the Eyrie, because, again, it's getting winter, it's getting colder, they're going to have to go down, they can't stay up there. So we'll see kind of the front part of this arc being them preparing to leave, them leaving, her having to help Robert Arryn get down, and all that comes with that, the drama of the Vale. And also, we're going to get the idea here, probably around the mid part of the season, where Littlefinger tells Sansa the plan. He tells her basically, yeah, Robert Arryn, maybe an accident happens. You're going to marry Harry. Harry's in line to take kind of the throne, I guess, of the Vale. And you can marry him, and then we'll reveal you, and we'll take back all your stuff. Whatever. So the rest of the season, I think, will be focusing on manipulating Harry. And I also want to show some hints that maybe Littlefinger's plan is not what he says it is. Maybe there's some actions that we see with Littlefinger that don't really make sense if that is what his plan is. So that's kind of going to be Sansa's plot, a very minimized plot, because, again, Sansa's not a major character in these two books. She doesn't do a whole lot in terms of, certain things going on compared to other characters like a Jon. So I just want to show her a little bit, and showing her, again, learning from Littlefinger, and showing how Littlefinger does his business and or work. And that will lead us to the young Griff plotline. So the young Griff plotline kind of left off with them losing Tyrion. So we're going to kind of come back to that. The rest of this season is going to be kind of growing young Griff as a character, and seeing him come into his own, where he's gaining leadership, and getting the Golden Company, for one. We're going to really play on that, and that's going to be kind of his first half arc. The first half arc is going to be him kind of gaining the Golden Company and earning their respect, and the back half is going to be them leaving, going to Westeros, and conquering Rook's Rest. That's kind of what I want to see in the final episode, is them taking Rook's Rest, becoming a major threat in Westeros. To me, that is a good way to end their story, and that is a good way to end season 6. That's not really going to be my end part, because I want that to actually happen at the beginning of the last episode of season 6, so that we can have maybe towards the middle or back half of that episode, we see that, okay, some people know about this, and now Ariane's going to go get involved with this whole plot. So I think that's actually a pretty good spot to end it. But let me know what you guys think. Do you guys like where I took the plots? For the most part, again, it's just following the book, so it's not anything terribly divisive there. I did take some measures to cut plots, but let me know if you guys want to see me continue doing this. I don't know if I want to keep doing this, because if I go further in the future, it's now making a fan fiction of what I think could happen in the story, and I just don't know if I want to do that. There's other people that could write those better than me, and I feel like adapting is much different than creating the story yourself. But if this video does well enough, if you guys let me know down in the comments that you guys want to see this, then I will. I mean, I've also been given the idea that maybe I should just go back and how I would adapt the earlier seasons as well, which I could do as well. I think that one would be much easier to do just because I think the show, for the most part, was pretty solid in the way it handled a lot of things. Just budget didn't help certain things, and maybe we could have done some other things to lean more into the fantasy magical element of the story. But thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this project. Took a while to do, and yeah, I don't know. Hopefully I didn't ramble on too much in this video. I am recording this pretty late at night, and yeah, I don't know. But yeah, thank you guys all for watching. If I do a season 7, I probably want to do these like once a month, because these are very time consuming, and I kind of want to space them out. So again, if I do this, don't be looking for it like immediately, like next week or something. I want to gauge how this video does. I want to gauge what your guys' interest is on this idea, if you guys liked this concept. But yeah, I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. I'll see you guys all in the next video. I think in the next video, so next video is going to be on Saturday. We're going to actually be doing an idea that I got inspiration from History of Westeros. I've been listening to a couple of their podcasts on my way to school. And I want to really talk about the Velaryons, because I think the Velaryons are an interesting house. I want to talk about how they fell, because they came from being the second most powerful family in all of Westeros down to a family that isn't really even that relevant by the time of the main story. So I want to kind of talk about how that happened, and also I want to talk about what is going to happen with the fate of their house as well. So let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.